Start. MTC. Day 08, Number 1. Many marine species including oysters, marsh grasses, and fish were deliberately introduced for food or for erosion control, with little knowledge of the impacts they could have. Fish and shellfish have been intentionally introduced all over the world for aquaculture, providing food and jobs, but they can escape and become a threat to native species, ecosystem function, or livelihoods. Atlantic salmon are reared in ocean net pens in Washington State and British Columbia. Washington State, British Columbia. Many escape each year, and they have been recovered in both saltwater and freshwater in Washington State, British Columbia, and Alaska. Washington State, British Columbia, Alaska. Recreational fishing can also spread invasive species. Baitworms from Maine are popular throughout the country. Maine. They are commonly packed in seaweed which contains many other organisms. If the seaweed is discarded, it or the organisms on it can colonize new areas. Fishing boots, recreational boats, and trailers can pick up organisms at one location and move them elsewhere. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Day 08, Number 2. Philosophical activity is based on the recognition of ignorance. The philosopher's thirst for knowledge is shown through attempts to find better answers to questions even if those answers are never found. At the same time, a philosopher also knows that being too sure can hinder the discovery of other and better possibilities. In a philosophical dialogue, the participants are aware that there are things they do not know or understand. The goal of the dialogue is to arrive at a conception that one did not know or understand beforehand. In traditional schools, where philosophy is not present, students often work with factual questions, they learn specific content listed in the curriculum, and they are not required to solve philosophical problems. However, we know that awareness of what one does not know can be a good way to acquire knowledge. Knowledge and understanding are developed through thinking and talking. Putting things into words makes things clearer. Therefore, students must not be afraid of saying something wrong or talking without first being sure that they are right. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Day 08, Number 3. Deep-fried foods are tastier than bland foods, and children and adults develop a taste for such foods. Fatty foods cause the brain to release oxytocin, a powerful hormone with a calming, anti-stress, and relaxing influence, said to be the opposite of adrenaline, into the bloodstream, hence the term comfort foods. We may even be genetically programmed to eat too much. For thousands of years, food was very scarce. Food, along with salt, carbs, and fat, was hard to get, and the more you got, the better. All of these things are necessary nutrients in the human diet, and when their availability was limited, you could never get too much. People also had to hunt down animals or gather plants for their food, and that took a lot of calories. It's different these days. We have food at every turn, lots of those fast food places and grocery stores with carry-out food. But that ingrained caveman mentality says that we can't ever get too much to eat. So craving for unhealthy food may actually be our body's attempt to stay healthy. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Day 08, Number 4. When trying to sustain an independent ethos, cultures face a problem of critical mass. No single individual, acting on his or her own, can produce an ethos. Rather, an ethos results from the interdependent acts of many individuals. This cluster of produced meaning may require some degree of insulation from larger and wealthier outside forces. The Canadian Inuit maintain their own ethos, even though they number no more than 24,000. 2-4. They manage this feat through a combination of trade, to support their way of life, and geographic isolation. The Inuit occupy remote territory, removed from major population centers of Canada. If cross-cultural contact were to become sufficiently close, the Inuit ethos would disappear. Distinct cultural groups of similar size do not, in the long run, persist in downtown Toronto, Canada, where they come in contact with many outside influences and pursue essentially Western paths for their lives. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Day 08, Number 5. The United Nations asks that all companies remove their satellites from orbit within 25 years after the end of their mission. 2.5. This is tricky to enforce, though, because satellites can, and often do, fail. To tackle this problem, several companies around the world have come up with novel solutions. These include removing dead satellites from orbit and dragging them back into the atmosphere, where they will burn up. Ways we could do this include using a harpoon to grab a satellite, catching it in a huge net, using magnets to grab it, or even firing lasers to heat up the satellite, increasing its atmospheric drag so that it falls out of orbit. However, these methods are only useful for large satellites orbiting Earth. There isn't really a way for us to pick up smaller pieces of debris such as bits of paint and metal. We just have to wait for them to naturally re-enter Earth's atmosphere. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Day 08, Number 6. Human innovation in agriculture has unlocked modifications in apples, tulips, and potatoes that never would have been realized through a plant's natural reproductive cycles. This cultivation process has created some of the recognizable vegetables and fruits consumers look for in their grocery stores. However, relying on only a few varieties of cultivated crops can leave humankind vulnerable to starvation and agricultural loss if a harvest is destroyed. For example, 1 million people died over the course of 3 years during the Irish potato famine because the Irish relied primarily on potatoes and milk to create a nutritionally balanced meal. 3. In order to continue its symbiotic relationship with cultivated plants, humanity must allow for biodiversity and recognize the potential drawbacks that monocultures of plants can introduce. Planting seeds of all kinds, even if they don't seem immediately useful or profitable, can ensure the longevity of those plants for generations to come. A balance must be struck between nature's capacity for wildness and humanity's desire for control. Day 9. MTC. Good job.